Good. So let's trace back. You have a little bit of experience with green timbers even before you came to Canada. Yeah. You were an import like me into this country. But go back to sort of your first hearing about green timbers. What was it that you heard first, and what did that do?
Yeah. So I was in my first year at North Park Theological Seminary in Chicago. And there was this, kind of well-known upperclassman, should we say, a guy that was going to be graduating. And his name was Wally Coots. Maybe some of you know Wally. Anyway, so all of a sudden, there's this conversation, and Wally is excited because there's this church in Canada, this whole other country, that has invited him to come and be a pastor. And as part of that, then I remember this guy showing up by the name of Albert Josephson. And so you had, Wally and Albert, and they were in Chicago, and I was just really, I knew nothing about Green Timbers Covenant Church, but I knew about a couple people, and I thought, there's some real energy going on here. And so maybe that's something about Green Timbers. That was my first, before I had any idea where this was.
Okay. And so then a few years later, you're back in Canada, not quite superintendent yet, but you have then another view, kind of. What did your expectations of Green Timbers, that from that first introduction, how'd that play out?
I'll tell you, so coming to Canada, when I came to Canada, there were a number of pastors who had served really long and faithfully. So I remember being at a pastor and spouse retreat. And at that point, it was still called Pastor and Wives Retreat. But anyway, it's the pastor and spouse retreat. And one of the things I remember a couple things. One, the group was super small. It was so small that we could all fit in the superintendent's room at the Banff Springs Hotel. And if you're wondering why they used to spend so lavishly, the economy was in the tank. The Banff Springs needed anybody to come, not the same today. And so they were appealing to Christian groups. So I got 2 of those. But what I remember is it was like myself and a couple other people and Wally, and then there was a huge gap up to a pastor that was like in his late 40s, early 50s, and then it was the next tier. But again, what struck me was Green Timbers, there was just kind of this dynamic of what was going on, because Wally was the first youth pastor, like full-time youth pastor. He kind of was, Green Timbers was a groundbreaker. And people in the conference saw how significant it was. And the superintendent, Jerome Johnson, and the board decided, we want to help others. And so they took some of their funds that they had, and they actually helped other churches. So, Green Timbers was really a groundbreaker for additional staff coming to churches in Canada.
Okay, and then Green Timbers became a family affair for you a little bit. What's that?
Sure. Yeah, so, I believe in, infiltration through family. No, I had nothing to do with it, but some of you may have been around when Dwayne Tissell was there, and the family connection is my wife, Darlene, and Dwayne's wife, Sharon, are sisters. And so, every now and then our young families would kind of meet up and come here, and so, that was just another little piece of getting to know a bit about Green Timbers.
Okay, and then all of a sudden you're the big cheese. Wow. You're the man in the conference, and you have a different role then, and you're watching Green Timbers from another vantage point. Mm-hmm. What was your relationship with this church as superintendent, and how did you see that playing out?
Yeah, so when you're superintendent, there are some churches that you end up spending a lot of time at. And eventually churches don't like that. It's like we don't really want it. Then there's some churches where your role is more like maybe working with a church during a time of a search committee, and as opposed to boy, this church, there's just things that keep going on, and you got to keep going back. And Green Timbers, honestly, was one of those churches that some people might say, we didn't really get our fair money's worth out of you. You didn't come out all that often. But that was kind of, Green Timbers had a quality of leadership over the years that, so I kind of look at arcs of things. There was a thoughtfulness, and it's not every church, because we're people, right? And we do, every church has some disagreements because people disagree. But it's how those things are handled. And so, that was one of my overarching kind of things, is just to have an appreciation for this church and how things went. And I was involved in a couple of pastoral transitions and other kind of formal things.
Yeah, and so it was in that sort of pastoral transition that you and I
Yes.
would have met.
Yes.
Some might say harassment was involved on
Yeah.
my end to get my name in here as soon as possible. But anything you want to share about that side of things?
Yeah, well, actually, Andy and I, now, we had met a little bit in Colorado also, right? So it wasn't like I had no idea who this guy was. But I actually was contacted by Andy a couple times, and the first time he contacted me, I was just kind of like, well, actually, the committee has just kind of gotten through their work, and so then there was a gap of time, and then the church was in a pastoral search. And
he wanted to talk to me about Canada on that time too, and I couldn't get off the phone fast enough. I said, "No, I just called about Green Timbers.
I know.
I didn't call about Canada, Jeff."
Yeah.
All right. So we've been talking a lot about DNA in our church here, as we've talked about trying to restart after COVID, and what's the DNA of the church, and how's it's going to be lived out. What has impressed you about the Green Timbers DNA over the years that you have known us?
Yeah. One of the things that I've always been impressed with, and you have to understand, it's as a person that comes in from time to time, but there is just a warmth, kind of like, when you go to someone's house, and in some houses you just feel like you're really welcome there. And I felt that warmth and welcome over the years with different pastors, with different people, sitting in different places in the pews, some sitting in the pews the whole time that I had experience here, but a lot of transition. So I would say that would be one thing. I would also say that, Green Timbers really made, they were the first church in Canada to really embrace moving beyond, shall we say, our original very Swedish character. And so there was this kind of wonderful multi-ethnic quality that has existed for a number of years. And some people will say, well, of course, it's in like an urban area. But we had other churches in urban areas, and that was not true in all of the churches. And so Green Timbers really was kind of on that front edge of where now we have a number of other churches that are like that. But again, Green Timbers, this is what I was trying to think about. It's kind of like the quiet leader. Some leaders are like, hey, I'm the dude, follow me. And some leaders are just, people look around and they say, now that person's going somewhere. And they're not making a lot of noise about it. And I've always sort of felt like that was part of the DNA of Green Timbers.
Okay, good. So the other thing we're saying as we go through this is we're celebrating 50 years, but we're prepping for the next 50. Mm-hmm. Now's your shot. You're no longer superintendent, so you don't have any say over things anymore. But now you have a little bit of advice for us. What do we need to do in the next 50 to make this move forward?
Yeah. Actually, you know, not being superintendent's great because you don't get yelled at near as much for things that people don't like. So now I can just kind of show up. But you know, this isn't like the first time I heard this question. So I was trying to think, what could I say? And I actually have a few verses. I think maybe that's just the best way to go on this. And this is from 1 Thessalonians 4. And these are verses that I think they probably say better than I can. They summarize some of the things that I've just said about your DNA. And that is what propels you into the future in a genuine way. So Paul says this to the church. Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write you. For you yourselves have been taught by God to love each other. And in fact, you do love all the brothers and sisters throughout Macedonia. Yet, we urge you, dear friends, to do more and more. Do so more and more. And I think, you know, that's just my word of encouragement is continue to live faithfully into the faithfulness that God has given you. You know, I actually I didn't say this, Dan, I really like the fact that you're spreading out a celebration. So often, a celebration of 50 years is like a one-time, one-shot, you either get it right or, you know, it's kind of a dud event. And I love the way you're kind of spreading it out because it gives a chance to, I think more deeply about what God has been doing. So do more and more.
Thanks, Jeff.